There are writers who tell stories, and then there are writers who seem to contain an entire society within their pages. Charles Dickens was one of those rare figures. When we speak his name today, we think of fog-covered London streets, of orphaned children and cramped workhouses, of laughter mixed with cruelty, warmth struggling against injustice. But Dickens did not invent these worlds from imagination alone. He lived them. This is the story of a man who began life in insecurity and ended it as the most famous author of his age, a writer who turned personal suffering into a moral mirror for the modern world. Charles Dickens was born in 1812 in Portsmouth, England, at the height of the Industrial Revolution, a time of progress on the surface and deep inequality beneath it. His early childhood was unstable but not tragic, until it suddenly was. When Charles was 12 years old, his father was imprisoned for debt. The family collapsed almost overnight. Charles was removed from school and sent to work in a blackening factory, pasting labels onto bottles for long hours each day. This experience marked him permanently. Years later, Dickens would describe the shame, loneliness, and fear of that period as something he never truly escaped. The child abandoned by society would grow into the writer who never stopped writing about abandoned children. Oliver Twist, David Copperfield, Pip. These were not inventions, they were echoes. After his father's release, Dickens returned briefly to education, but his real schooling took place in London itself. He worked as a law clerk, then as a court reporter, walking endlessly through the city. He observed everything: the rhythm of the streets, the cruelty of institutions, the comedy of human behavior. London became his greatest character, alive, noisy, unfair, fascinating. And from these observations, Dickens began to write. His first published sketches appeared under the pseudonym Boz. They were humorous, sharp, deeply observant, and readers loved them. Then came the Pickwick Papers. Published in installments, the story spread like a social event. People waited for each new chapter. Dickens was suddenly not just a writer, but a phenomenon. What made him different was not elegance or philosophical abstraction, it was accessibility. Dickens wrote for everyone, the educated and the uneducated, the rich and the poor. His stories crossed class boundaries, something rare in Victorian England. As his fame grew, so did his ambition. Dickens was not content to entertain, he wanted to expose. In Oliver Twist, he revealed the brutality of workhouses. In Nicholas Nickleby, the abuse of children. In Bleak House, the paralysis of the legal system. In Hard Times, the dehumanizing logic of industrial thinking. Yet he never wrote as a cold reformer. He wrote as a moral storyteller, using humor, exaggeration, and unforgettable characters to guide readers toward empathy rather than ideology. This is why his criticism endured. He attacked systems, not humanity. In 1843, under financial pressure and emotional exhaustion, Dickens wrote A Christmas Carol in a matter of weeks. It became one of the most influential stories ever written. Ebenezer Scrooge is not punished, he is changed. Redemption, Dickens suggests, is possible even for the hardest heart. This belief that people can change sits at the core of Dickens' worldview. It is what keeps his darkest stories from becoming hopeless. Dickens did not live quietly. He edited journals, managed publications, and embarked on exhausting public reading tours. His performances were theatrical, emotional, and wildly popular. Audiences wept. Dickens collapsed. The strain damaged his health, but he could not stop. Writing and performing had become inseparable from his identity. Behind the public admiration lay a more complicated personal life. His marriage deteriorated. His emotional life became guarded, fragmented, private. Victorian society demanded moral clarity, but Dickens himself was human, contradictory, driven. imperfect. This tension between public virtue and private complexity deepens rather than diminishes his legacy. Charles Dickens died in 1870, leaving his final novel unfinished. He was buried in Westminster Abbey, a recognition once reserved for kings and poets, now granted to a novelist who had reshaped public conscience. His influence did not fade. The word Dickensian entered language. His characters never left culture. His questions remain unresolved. How should a society treat its weakest members? What is the cost of progress without compassion? Charles Dickens did not write from distance. He wrote from memory, from childhood humiliation, from crowded streets, from human absurdity and pain. And in doing so, he created stories that still speak, not as relics of the past, but as warnings and reminders. To read Dickens is not only to enter Victorian England, it is to recognize ourselves.
Thanks for listening to Books Simply. If you spot any mistakes or have suggestions, feel free to share them in the comments. If this helped you, a like is appreciated. You're welcome to subscribe and let us know which author you'd like to see next.